Well, good morning, everybody. So I'm going to make a start now. And so the first thing I want to do is just to tell you about what it is we're going to be discussing this morning. So you know the title, An Introduction to Collecting and Analysing Qualitative Data. So I'm sure most of us already know, but just to make super clear, qual data is essentially non-numerical data. So we can get that through sort of interviews or ethnography, focus groups, case studies, participant observation. Something that I always really encourage and think is a really great idea is to actually be collecting qual data alongside quantitative so that it actually provides some really interesting context to the numerical data that you already have. And due to the fact that you are Impact Insight Toolkit users, we are going to be focusing on using open questions in your toolkit surveys. Okay, so that's what we're going to be focusing on this morning. And as this is a webinar, as opposed to a presentation, as opposed to purely a presentation, I would like to encourage you to get involved. If you have any advice for anybody, then please do feel free to unmute your microphones or send a message in the chat box and let me know. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so I suppose the first question is, why would you even want to include these sorts of questions? So open text questions. You'll see that I have popped in 3 bullet points there. Now, I have my own thoughts around each of these bullet points, but equally, you might have additional thoughts on this too, okay? So as said earlier, please do not shy away from getting involved. Okay, so the first point, allowing for detail. So using qual data basically provides the opportunity for there to be unrestricted content. And that gives us context and helps us to understand more about what the audience thinks, helps us gain clarification on their responses to other questions. And it helps you as someone that's conducting the analysis to understand their reasoning and their thought processes, and whether that's through their language choices or through their frames of reference. There's an awful lot you can learn from reading someone's thoughts in their own words. So I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on this point on detail, or else I'll just carry on actually through the other two and then open it up. I'll do that. Okay, so my second one is about learning something unexpected. So the really great thing about qual data is that due to the fact there are no restrictions, as mentioned earlier, it means that you may be receiving unique and completely unexpected responses. So unanticipated answers can actually give really valuable insight. One of the organisations that I have worked with over the past few years, they were using the platform to analyse an exhibition, and they used one of the short text, open answers. And it was amazing because I think they received something like 1,000 responses. And in 700 of those responses, the word cutter was used. And I personally think that is so incredibly telling I mean, I didn't actually go to the exhibition, and yet, I mean, that in itself really intrigued me. So yes, so it can really highlight certain points, or like I've said, learn something completely unexpected. So there is also something that you might notice if you include these sorts of things, is that sometimes people might even use the space you provide to give you contact details and request for you to get in touch to discuss something in particular. It's important to know when you are allowing for sort of open text and the more open style questions that people don't always stick to the rules. In fact, I think notoriously people choose to not stick to the rules, which is cool. But it's just something you need to be aware of when you are analysing the qual data. So my final point that I have here is self-expression and creativity. So you are able to learn more about your audience as individuals, because how somebody might respond to a question can tell you an awful lot about them as individuals. I mean, there are instances where people have actually been sent a link to a blog post, say, which is in association with the work, through the open text. Alternatively, things such as, you know, punctuation marks, emojis, that sort of thing, you know, you can really learn a lot about your audience through what they say, like that, in that sense. I have this lovely little red bit of text here saying, be careful. So the reason I say be careful is that it's just so important to get the right balance, because if you are asking open questions, it can be very, very time consuming to answer, and also even more time consuming to analyze. So, I mean, we say this with all questions, whether it's the qual or the quant, but you need to know why you're asking what you're asking. Don't ask questions just for the sake of it, because there's just nothing really to gain there. It might even be that you just want to ask a couple of open questions. So I'm not saying don't ask them, because I'm really pro qual data, but equally, I do think that when you are deciding to use qual data, you just need to really think about it and make sure you're asking what you really want to be asking. So here I'm just going to see if anybody has any thoughts on this particular, of what we've discussed so far. If anybody has any other pieces of insight, perhaps, on why you would want to include this sorts of data. Yeah, great. Yeah, so Isabel has said that the qual data can help to contextualize the quantitative, and absolutely, yeah. So I mean, there are certain things, if you think about it, like yes, no, multiple choice, that sort of thing. You know, it's really they are really great for sort of getting that fixed data. But the qual data sort of allows much more nuance, much more flexibility, and exactly, Isabel, it gives the opportunity for context to be given to the quantitative data. So absolutely, yes, I think the context is really, really important here. So we have here collecting qual data. So we've sort of mentioned quite briefly earlier on this morning, just about the different types of qual data. I said about, you know, ethnography, for instance, focus groups, that sort of thing. But here, I'm just going to mention a couple of other little things. And in particular, in relation to when you are using culture counts. So when you are using the platform Culture Counts to conduct the survey on, say, tablets, for instance, I personally often suggest that people also have maybe a little notebook in addition to the tablet, just so that they can make notes of any interesting points. So, for example, of, you know, body language, that sort of thing. That, for me, body language is incredibly telling, not only about what they thought of the work, but also about them as individuals. So I think that things such as body language are really great to be able to record. But as you can imagine, it doesn't really lend itself, using a sort of a digital platform like Culture Counts. It doesn't have to be Culture Counts, it could be any. It doesn't really lend itself to sort of gathering that really nuanced data. And so that is where I do encourage people to gather sort of information on the side, as it were, information that will really contribute to their understanding of the data overall. So I would always recommend that people have either like a little notebook that they write notes in. Sometimes people actually record their interviews. Of course, this depends entirely on the work that you are actually evaluating. But either way, it's really good to be able to get an idea of sort of the more qualitative element of their response to work, not just the quantitative. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. So we're going to be spending a couple of minutes here thinking about where to start when analysing your qual data. So there are many, many different ways to analyse qual data, especially, of course, when considering things like the body language and ethnographic research. But due to the fact that this is sort of more focused on sort of the survey delivery and the use of culture counts, or of course it could be any other online surveying platform, we are going to focus specifically on two analytical methods. So you've got content analysis and grounded analysis. So content analysis would be where you start with some ideas, so hypotheses or themes that you think might emerge, and then you look for them in the data that you've collected. Okay, so this is particularly useful if you are trying to make a specific case with your data. Grounded analysis is where you do not start from any sort of preconceptions or a defined point, and instead you are sort of allowing the data to let's say, speak for itself. Okay, and you'll just be looking at themes that are emerging. So this is potentially a little bit more tricky, as it does require the analyst to distance themselves from the evaluation. So if you are really close to the work that's being evaluated and you have thoughts already on how it could be perceived by the audience, then grounded analysis would be, I personally think, quite difficult to do, or at least you would have to be very aware that you weren't slipping into content analysis. So just as a quick example to sort of look at the difference, so I was thinking about potentially evaluating a dance production, and I asked some open text questions in my survey, and I now want to analyse those responses. With content analysis, I might start sort of reading the data with themes that have already been established. So for example, we could say skill and athleticism, emotional response, production, or external factors, for example, sort of front of house, that sort of thing. If using grounded analysis, I would need to sort of clear my mind of any preconceived ideas and see which themes emerge as I read through the comments. So as you can imagine, if I were particularly close to the work, I might find that quite challenging. In practice, people actually often start with content analysis, so sort of having those themes or those headings, and then move towards grounded analysis. Okay, so it sort of expands as people read more and more. But either way, regardless of whether you're doing content analysis or grounded analysis, you will then need to code. So coding your data means that you will have sort of something tangible to then be able to think critically about afterwards. So if you are coding your data, there are, as you can imagine, a variety of different ways to do it. So you can do it by hand. Obviously, this is not recommended for really large samples, as it can be very time consuming and very, very labor intensive. Of course, if you only had like 10 responses, then you absolutely could do it by hand. And you could you could use highlighters with different colors to sort of reflect the various themes, or sticky notes, that sort of thing. So yeah, so you absolutely can do it by hand, but personally, I wouldn't recommend it, especially if it is a really large sample size. If you're using Excel, which can be a really handy tool, I mean, personally, I probably use it an awful lot, then you can use, I don't know how familiar you are with with the actual sort of the commands within Excel, the calculations, but you can use the COUNTIF and wildcard function to count how many times a certain word comes up. So that's a really, really handy tool there, which I personally use quite a lot. Or you can simply add a number one each time and then sort of do a sum. So that's almost more like a tally. So the COUNTIF is sort of the more, COUNTIF and wildcard is more, probably the more Excel-y. I'm saying that with little quotation marks going on here. Whereas the one with the with sort of the more tally side of it, it's probably like a bit of an in-between. And I'll be interested to see here. Karis, that's a very good question. Sorry. So wildcard. Wildcard basically means that the text doesn't only present that word. Okay. So say I was looking for the word colour. Going back to the example that I used a little while ago with the organisation, with the exhibition. So say I was looking for the word colour, I would use a wildcard, which is, it's a certain calculation that you use in Excel. And I would recommend you look it up, COUNTIF and wildcard, if there are, say, specific words that you want to try and pull out of any qualitative data that you have. Yes, it's really useful because it will just literally give you a number, the number of times it has been used. So that is something that I would definitely, sort of recommend you have a look at. There'll be something I'll discuss later on about how to best use qual data in the toolkit, and this is sort of and so it will sort of go back to the whole wildcard question then as well. But yeah, so a wildcard is great because it basically means that that it doesn't only look at the cell if it purely contains that word, and it can contain things around it as well. So here we are talking about that. So using sort of that analytical style of things. So whether it's with the COUNTIF wildcard, or if you're doing more of sort of a sum, so like a tally, it can be a really good indicator on what sort of stood out to the audience or the largest themes, but it can actually be rather misleading. So this is my sort of word of warning, if you like. So let's look at the two different statements. Incredible skill and talent displayed. You've got that one. And then number 2, surprised by the lack of skill. So Excel would pick up the word skill in both of these instances. So if you were doing a COUNTIF wildcard, for instance, or the sum tally option, then Excel would pull out that word skill regardless of which sentence it was in. And obviously, if you then look at the complete data, you can see that the two contexts where the word skill was used were completely different. So just to say it again, number 1, incredible skill and talent displayed. Number 2, surprised by the lack of skill. So something that I recommend people do, and I hope that you will sort of agree with this, is that this Excel option can be really, really great and super useful, but only if you know a little bit about the context of where it's coming from. So if you wanted to do this, I would recommend that you have 2 questions, one with sort of more of a positive slant. So, for example, what would you say was particularly successful about this performance? And one with a more negative slant. So something like, regarding this performance, where would you say improvements could be made? And then this way, you'll know if something is being said in a positive or negative light. So for instance, you could do your COUNTIF and wildcard on the positive column, and then again on the negative column. And this way, you would know where their responses were coming from. I think that this is somewhere where it can be really, really helpful to write notes to yourself, sort of when you're going through your qual data. So you can just sort of make notes of any key points that come up, or any particularly interesting quotes. Something that a lot of people don't allow space for when they're doing their analysis is answers such as don't know, or no idea, not sure, hadn't thought about it. Things like that are that they do crop up a fair amount. So when you are doing any sort of analysis, it is just worth bearing in mind that phrases such as that will come up. Okay, so moving on to the next stage, we have think critically. So when you have your data in front of you, so the codes is what I'm specifically thinking of right now. So not the complete raw data, but when you're actually looking at the code specifically, are there any links between them? Or are there any sort of overarching themes that are coming through? Are some things mentioned more frequently than others? And if so, what does that mean? Have you seen sort of that there are any patterns or themes or trends? And of course, this is where I think it's really important to mention that it's definitely worth considering the wider survey responses. So for instance, demographics, okay, you will know that there are 3 questions asked within your toolkit surveys automatically that relate to demographics. And of course, if you want to add more, you can, just as a little reminder. But it might be that there are situations where a certain demographic will use particular language or will seem to have a particular response that another demographic group wouldn't express. So it is really interesting and really important to have that sort of critical thought process as you are going through the data, and to bring it in with the other survey responses as well. And so once you've sort of established that, you can then have a look and see what are the deviations from the patterns and how can these be explained. So, what has surprised you about the data? What can you see in it that you weren't expecting? And what do you need to find out more about? Was there something in particular that really stood out to you and you thought, gosh, this was a surprise. What does this mean? And what can I learn from it? And of course, especially when using the toolkit, you have the self pre-event survey. And within that, we encourage you to sort of think about original objectives. What are the objectives of the work? What is it that the creative or commissioning or programming team is actually trying to achieve through this piece of work? And the qual data is really, really useful here to be able to see if it is speaking back to those original objectives. Something that I do with a user of the platform that actually isn't Toolkit. So for those of you that don't know, Culture Counts is sort of a commercial platform. Obviously, Impact Insight Toolkit is the project that Arts Council are sort of asking the MPOs to participate in, but there are others that we work with that are entirely separate from the Impact and Insight Toolkit. And for instance, one of these organisations that I work with, I do say to them, when they do that, so they actually use it in a similar way. They do a prior survey, and they also do a public one afterwards as well. And something that I say to them is, in your prior surveys, maybe write one standout feature that you want the audience to come away with, or one standout thought that you want your audience to walk away with. What is that one thing? So just say it in a short phrase, or even a word if possible, and see how that is then reflected in the qual data that comes back at the end. As you know, Culture Counts does use quite a lot of quantitative data. With the sliders, it's sort of the idea of the dimensions is to kind of try and find that sweet spot really between qual and quant. But it doesn't really mean anything without the additional context. And so for me, I always recommend people do put in a free text bit to the prior survey as well, so that this sort of analysis can occur. When you are looking at your analysis and your coding, you also need to really think about where you're coming from. So have you been as objective as you can? No one is going to say that you are going to be 100% objective, because when you are so close to a piece of work, you can't be totally objective. What you can be is aware of your own bias and to try to sort of counteract that. I mean, something that we even recommend, would it be possible to get someone else on the team to give their perspective? It might be that you do the bulk of the work and then say to somebody else, can you just have a quick look at this and check that I'm looking at it in an appropriate way, or that I haven't allowed my own perspective to sort of affect how I'm perceiving this data. Once you have done the analysis, the coding, the critical thinking, it's then time to present your analysis. So you need to think when you're presenting about the audience, the purpose, and what content should be included to best tell the story of your data. So is it a report? Is it a presentation? We all know the Arts Council are asking you to use the Impact and Insight report. For you to send to your relationship managers. We know that that is something that Arts Council are asking you to do. And that's great because it pulls everything together and it gives you a little bit of space to also say about your objectives and what insights were gained. But there will be other instances where you might want to use your data, especially if you have gone beyond the Arts Council's core questions and you have asked some of your own. So don't be afraid to use your results for a different purpose. That is completely fine. Apologies for my cough. So I'm aware that this has been quite a heavy slide, but I'm wondering if you have any further points or any recommendations that you would like to give to the people that are attending here today. You are the ones that are sort of on the ground. I always say you are the ones that are actually, conducting evaluations, speaking to audiences, and the artistic teams as well. So you are the ones that have the experience in an actual sense here. Okay, so Caroline has popped something in the box here, and Caroline has said that she doesn't feel that they have any room for any other questions than the Arts Council compulsory questions. So having qual data would be good, but not for the toolkit as it is now. Okay. So that's interesting to hear. I think we might have already discussed this actually before. So yes, as we know, there are the six fixed questions that Arts Council are asking you to use. A lot of people are asking questions in addition to those six, but obviously that isn't necessarily going to be right for everybody. And as said before as well, that does depend on how you are going to be distributing the surveys and what it is that you are looking to sort of really get out of it. But yeah, absolutely. For some people, the six will be ample. The six questions will be ample. So I just wanted to briefly say something about coding because we spoke quite a lot about it in the previous slide. And it is a tricky one because without software, you might struggle to get the insight you're looking for when you are doing qual data analysis. But equally, software can be really expensive. So, I mean, I've already said about potentially having the two questions, one sort of with a more positive slant, one with a more negative, so that you can use Excel. But if that isn't something that you are wanting to do, there is always, of course, the possibility to purchase additional software. I personally have not used any additional software, but I have had a little look, and there is some that seems to be that seems to have particularly sort of high ratings, and also is also of lower cost. Some have discounts for charities, and as arts organisations, I know quite a lot of Arts Council funded organisations are also registered charities. So something that I came across whilst doing my scouting, if you like, was this one that's called Quirkos. I don't know if anyone's used it before, but it did seem a little bit more sort of simple and less expensive than others. And like I said, also they had like a charities discount. So just in case anybody was thinking Excel is slightly terrifying, and I can't, and say I receive 500 responses, I can't go through and read each one individually and do the whole highlighting sticky note option. So that's just something I wanted to mention, because this, as I'm sure you are all aware, there is sort of software or digital assistance for basically anything, including this. So I just wanted to mention it there, just in case anybody was not aware. So we're just going to have a little brief discussion about using the toolkit when doing for qual data. So here is a screenshot of the design page in my survey. Lizzie Wears Red is one that you may have already encountered if you've spoken with me quite a lot. It's something that I refer to a fair amount. So you'll see here that we have the dimensions. I've gone towards the bottom of my design page with the different dimensions, and then I've got the recommended additional ones that Arts Council have put forward. Please know that they are not the compulsory ones, but they are the recommended. And then over on the left-hand side, you see there's the Add Content panel. Now, probably a few of you will have already explored this, but I would just like to point out the short text and the free text options. So the short text is basically presents it like a one-liner, okay? So it looks the same as when you have that 3 words one. It's the same style question as that. The free text looks more like a paragraph, okay? So it's just a good way for you to be able to indicate to the respondent of how much text to give. So here you can see a reporting dashboard. So this is another one of my examples. Jack less than threes Jill, or loves Jill, or hearts Jill, depending on how you want to put it. But this is another one of my example evaluations. And so what I wanted to show you here is how the 2 different open text questions are graphed, how the responses to those 2 different open text questions are presented to you. So you'll see that when a short text question is used, so please write 3 words to describe your emotional response to Jack less than threes Jill, you can see that a short text question was used. And there, the system will graph the words, okay? So similarly to what I said before, when I was talking about Excel, this is really good to sort of like get a snapshot. The only thing I will mention is that you don't know necessarily how some words will have been used, if it's in a positive frame or a more negative frame. So I think that these words that are presented here, poignant, beautiful, devastating, happy, excitement, are probably going to be more along the positive slant, whereas a word such as skill, like I mentioned earlier, I used that as an example, you don't know in what context that's being used, how it's being framed. Now, the free text question you'll see there is not graphed. And the reason for that is that it's sort of presented almost like a, like I said, it's like a paragraph. And I think if you were going to be graphing a free text response, you would end up with and being, you know, the one right up at the very top there, along with the and as and other similar words that maybe are not so useful when doing your analysis. So if you wanted to then explore it further, so to look beyond the basic reporting dashboard that's presented to you, you can click on Export Evaluation and download CSV. Yep, so Isabel has just mentioned here that the may be coming up as the most popular word. And yeah, exactly. Because the system is, it basically does a frequency count of the words that have been most commonly used. If somebody has been writing the or and or anything like that, then it can sort of take away from the main words you're actually wanting to get at, which is why we sort of encourage the 3 words question is quite good, because it's saying please write 3 words to describe your experience. And generally speaking, I mean, not all the time, of course, but generally speaking, people do tend to stick to that. Yeah, exactly, Isabel. People don't follow the rules. From what I have seen, generally speaking, people tend to be pretty good. So I've been doing some analysis for some people, and there'll be things like thought-provoking, challenging, stimulating, happy, exciting, good. Good comes up quite a lot, doesn't it? Great. Things like that. And that's sort of what we're hoping to get out of it. But as Isabel has rightly said, people don't follow the rules. And so when they do that, it's quite possible that they will be sticking in the's and ands and things. And then, of course, the system will graph them. But this is where it is useful that you can export the evaluation. Okay, so if you click on that orange button and then click on export, I think it's export CSV or download CSV, that means that you will get the full raw data in Microsoft Excel. Okay, so this here is the CSV, which has been exported from the reporting dashboard. Now, before I get into that, Isabel has just made a comment about how there has been a difference in the number of responses which followed the 3 words rule between the 2 projects that have been evaluated. Now, that's quite interesting. And Isabel, if you want to sort of talk about that briefly at the end, that would be great. This is our last slide. So once we've done this, it'd be great to sort of, you know, hear any further thoughts or experiences anyone's had on using it. So when we've actually downloaded the CSV, you can see that this one over here is a short text. So these are the ones that are graphed in the platform, and free text, these are the ones that are not. So essentially, I think if you've spoken with me before, you all know that every column is a question and every row is a response. Okay, so you can see here, this is the 3 words question. And then we have here an any further feedback question as well, which had no direction as to how much they should answer. And generally speaking, I would say it's the free text one where you would need to sort of do the more sort of like the analysis and the coding and such like. Especially if you do split the 3 words almost into 2, so you have the positive and then the negative. So the complete raw data includes everything, as is sort of in the title. So that would mean, you know, the responses to dimensions, the demographics, and also any qual data. As soon as you start thinking about any form of analysis, whether that's content or grounded, you will want to ensure that your data is in front of you so that you are just really clear at what you're looking at. And don't forget, you can always turn your spreadsheet into a table, filter by different genders or you know, any other sort of responses. So say you've done a yes, no, like, you know, this is your first time visiting us or whatever you've got. You could filter by any of those questions. And again, you could also do a comparison there to see if people that maybe hadn't attended before were using a certain type of vocabulary, or if they were more inclined to a specific way in comparison to those that, you know, that hadn't. So it's, what I'm saying is that when you have the when you have the CSV, the raw data, the complete raw data, there is an awful lot you can do with it. And I think sometimes it can feel a little bit maybe overwhelming because there can just be so much. But equally, it gives you so much opportunity to be conducting further analysis and to really learn how your audience think about your work. So that's probably everything from me. So I'm just going to ask now if anybody has got anything that they wanted to say. I know that we've sort of had a bit of a discussion earlier, and also that it may be that people want to sort of, you know, communicate afterwards, which I've already said I'm happy to put some people in touch with each other if they want to. So very happy to facilitate that. Do let me know if you want to sort of have more of a discussion on things. But yes, so that's all I have on this particular topic. So, okay, so Caroline has got a question here that I think she was going to, I think this is more directed to the others in the group as opposed to me, because obviously I work here. So, so Caroline has just said, can she ask who is leading on Impact Insight and who makes sure it happens? So, I mean, we'll have to see how the others respond to this here. But this is something that does get discussed because it can often sort of move around between different members of the team. So it might be someone that's in marketing, might be someone in programming. We've had people that are doing it in sort of development side of things, or to, you know, there's just such a variety of people that are leading on it. We have sort of more producers sometimes are actually leading it. It really is a variety of people. So I think that's something that is incredibly organisation dependent, and obviously really depends on people's sort of the capacity of each organisation, and you know, and the resources that are available to them. So I very much think that that is something that is yeah, incredibly organisation dependent and size dependent and all the rest of it. Okay, so I think I'm going to put a few of you in contact with each other, and I am going to just really thank you all for coming, because I know that this has taken an hour out of your day, but I hope that it's been useful to sort of have this conversation. And if you weren't sure that you even could add qual data, that you might now be able to consider popping some questions in, or a couple of questions in. And also maybe it's given you some food for thought if you haven't before. So yes, I will get you, the three of you, in touch with each other, and I very much hope that you'll have a lovely rest of your day. Thank you.